Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we take the world's most compelling information, sometimes pristine, sometimes utterly chaotic, and distill it down to the essential, fascinating truth for you.
And today we are, I think, undertaking a truly remarkable feat of culinary archaeology. We're not reading a finished book,
Yep.
not at all.
No.
We are diving into the remnants of one. It's a 2-foot-high stack of raw, blurry, unedited carbon copies that were supposed to become the Federal Writers Project's magnum opus, a book called America Eats.
And what a mission this archive represents. I mean, we are effectively unearthing the American plate just before the massive industrialization of food and culture.
Exactly.
Think, late 1930s, early 1940s, a world without the interstate highway system, before frozen dinners, when local, seasonal, and intensely regional cuisine was king. Yeah. If you want a shortcut to understanding the gourmet heritage of the U.S., you have to look at this world, which essentially vanished overnight.
It's a chaotic testament. And, that chaos is its greatest value. Because this material was never edited, never filtered by some central authority, we get hundreds of different unfiltered voices,
Right.
all describing the most intensely regional, community-driven, and seasonal eating habits this country's ever known. It's a genuine, unvarnished look at the American identity through its kitchen door.
Okay, let's unpack this historical moment first. Because for us to truly grasp the impact of the America Eats manuscript, we have to understand the vanishing America that the Federal Writers Project, the FWP, was trying to capture. What did that landscape even feel like to travel through in, say, 1940?
Well, it felt intensely local. You were traversing 2-lane roads in dark-colored cars, often with simple dashboards and split windshields.
Right.
This was not the standardized America we know today. Food was hyper-regional, and it often shifted radically over just, short distances. Fast food didn't exist. Even in restaurants, the prevailing style was home cooking, which, according to the sources, meant quality varied wildly, but it was almost always tied to local ingredients.
That idea of hyper-regionalism is so hard to wrap your head around today. Can you give us a specific example of how taste literally changed so drastically over a short distance? Almost like crossing an invisible culinary border.
Oh, for sure. One striking detail captured in the field reports is the systematic change in breakfast size.
Okay.
If you traveled west from the Atlantic, breakfast consistently got larger, heavier, and more complex the further inland you went.
Wow.
Or consider the humble hamburger. In the Northeast, it was straightforward, meat and bun. But by the time the FWP documented it in California, it had become virtually a salad sandwich.
A salad sandwich.
Piled high with lettuce, tomato, all kinds of sauces. It was a completely distinct culinary divergence.
And the absence of certain staples is just as telling as their presence, isn't it? We see that documented beautifully in the sources.
Absolutely. If you were raised in New England, you might expect corn relish or popovers, those airy, hollow rolls dispensed from a deep tin box strapped to the server's shoulders before your meal.
I can picture that.
But certain ethnic foods were extremely localized. Excellent rye bread and bagels, only from Jewish bakeries. Crusty Italian bread from Italian bakeries. And as soon as you left the Northeast and major cities like New York or somewhere in California, staple Jewish foods like bagels just disappeared from the map.
Meanwhile, the South was all about generous portions of fried food, often with powdered sugar used everywhere. And if you journeyed up to the Pacific Northwest, say Seattle, you're snacking on regional specialties like applets and kotlets.
Those unique, chewy, sugar-dusted fruit bars.
Yeah. And the source material notes that the only genuine national chains that existed were A&W Root Beer and Howard Johnson's, which was a New England company primarily known for fried clams and its 28 flavors of ice cream.
That intense lack of culinary standardization.
Yeah.
That is the entire fragile map the FWP was racing against time to record.
Which brings us to the FWP itself. It really was a miracle. We talk so often in the U.S. about the separation of state and culture. We don't have a Ministry of Culture, and you will not find a single writer or philosopher or composer on a U.S. bill or coin.
Not one. Yet, in the wake of the Depression and the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who the sources acknowledge had this rare political gift for maximizing an electoral mandate, we had this moment. Pure government-subsidized arts, it was unparalleled, and the archives rightly label it a miraculous undertaking.
And naturally, it was met with immediate, intense public cynicism. The workers were mockingly labeled pencil leaners, which echoed the WPA's shovel leaners.
Right, I've heard that.
Yeah, editorials were actually arguing that poverty, not government money, was the true crucible for great writing.
But the true, profound legacy, the one that endures beyond any of the guidebooks, was that the project became a nursery for literary giants. It was providing support during the darkest years of the Depression.
Just think about the talent density in the Chicago office alone. You had Nelson Algren, who was already published, Saul Bellow, fresh out of college, Jack Conroy, and Richard Wright.
And Richard Wright famously worked on the guidebooks by day while writing the masterpiece Native Son in his spare time. Studs Terkel wrote radio scripts for them, and even Katherine Dunham, the pioneering dancer, was involved.
The New York and Massachusetts offices were just as stacked. You've got John Cheever, Ralph Ellison, Claude McKay, Kenneth Patchen, Conrad Aiken. It was a massive employment project disguised as a cultural one.
It was, but the internal dynamics were often fraught. Perhaps the most famous example of the project's internal contradictions is Zora Neale Hurston down in Florida.
Right.
Despite having already published Their Eyes Were Watching, a foundational text of American literature, she was inexplicably kept at the lowest possible position within the project hierarchy.
It's unbelievable.
That said, the FWP did have a progressive mandate in many ways. It is noted that African American literature and cultural documentation made significant advances under the FWP, partly because the project, starting in 1936, actively interviewed formerly enslaved people.
Right, and they were tasked with including sections on Black history and culture in their state guidebooks, which, shone a light on previously ignored narratives.
So the mission for America Eats was incredibly ambitious. It's developed by Catherine Kellick, the national supervising editor. She looked at those European Baedeker guides and decided America needed a detailed grassroots study of its own people, its culture, and especially its ways of eating.
And it was all about reflecting that post-Depression interest in forging a singular national identity.
And crucially, that national identity was not meant to be sanitized. The intent was a Woody Guthrie song approach, "This land is your land," which asked the hard questions, about those locked out of the American dream.
So acknowledging the country's flaws, it was definitely not meant to be the escapist smooth anthem of God Bless America.
Not at all.
But that's the ideal, right? And here's where the ideal met the grim reality of local politics. The FWP guidebooks were successful and earned support because they pleased local chambers of commerce and tourism interests.
And that support invariably came at a cost.
The cost of journalistic integrity.
That local pressure led to systematic censorship. Contentious issues just had to be removed. In the guides for Pittsburgh, Kansas, and Butte, Montana, all references to ongoing labor disputes were scrubbed.
The New Jersey guide had to remove a direct reference to tear gas being deployed against striking workers. Even historical narratives, like the description of the siege of the Alamo, had all internal historical debate just eliminated.
So the goal of documenting America's messy truth was consistently compromised by the need for local approval.
And then the ultimate external force intervened. So get this. The deadline for submitting All America Eats copy was Thanksgiving week 1941. They were scrambling to finish a decade's worth of work.
Just days later, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The sources described this palpable atmosphere of panic, with letters flying out from Washington, D.C., urging state directors to submit whatever they had immediately before the inevitable axe fell.
And it was rapid. The FWP officially ended on May 1st, 1942. The project was immediately repurposed, transforming into the writers' unit of the War Services Subdivision.
Their focus shifted overnight from cultural history to military necessity. They started producing things like the Bomb Squad Training Manual.
A total 180.
Yeah.
And America Eats, the culmination of all their culinary research, was just abandoned, never published.
Catherine Kellick, who envisioned and championed the whole project, was dismissed with 2 weeks' notice. But she performed one final crucial service. She made sure that every manuscript, every letter, every note she had received was turned over to the Library of Congress.
And that's what leaves us with this incredible resource today. What remains is this massive, chaotic, 2-foot-high stack of raw, unedited, often blurry carbon copies on onion skin paper.
Yeah, it is not the clean, single-voiced, well-edited book the FWP planned. It's something arguably more valuable.
A raw, energetic, and unfiltered assortment of reports, stories, and recipes from hundreds of different American voices. It gives us an instant, direct portal into 1940 America.
So let's open that portal.
Oh.
Let's turn to the Northeast, specifically New England. This region, according to these manuscripts, is characterized by an almost stubborn adherence to local tradition, particularly when it comes to seafood.
Clams.
Clams, above all, dominate.
That rigid traditionalism is so fascinating. The field reports capture how clams became the defining seafood, valued even more highly than oysters, a preference that dates back centuries, long before the arrival of the Pilgrims.
And they weren't just a food source, they were central to ritual. The reports detailed two main types. First, you have the soft-shell clams, Maya arenaria, known locally as Ipswich clams or steamers. And when you steam them, they're eaten following what they call a near ritual. You have to roll the black membrane off the neck, dip the clam in the broth to wash off any sand, and only then dip it in melted butter, using just your thumb and index finger.
It sounds like a delicate, precise operation. And I love the description of how they judge quality. It's determined by the size and plumpness of the soft central part, the belly.
Which is why the modern frozen processed clam strip, which removes that belly entirely, is considered an utter culinary atrocity in New England.
It gets the essence of the dish.
It does. Then you have the hard-shell clams, Mercenaria. They'll come in three sizes. The smallest are the little necks, primarily eaten raw.
Okay.
And interestingly, the manuscripts capture a slight annoyance among New Englanders that Long Islanders claim ownership of the name, when in fact, New Englanders point to a place called Little Neck in Ipswich Bay as the true namesake.
A little bit of local rivalry there.
A little bit. Then you have cherry stones, also eaten raw, and the largest, the quahogs, which are mainly reserved for chowder.
Which brings us to the most intense culinary battle documented by the FWP, the infamous Manhattan chowder dispute. It's incredible that the federal government was documenting this level of food snobbery.
Oh, it's high drama. New Englanders, particularly those in Massachusetts, heaped intense scorn upon the Rhode Island clam chowder that dared to include tomatoes.
The horror.
This deviation was almost certainly introduced by Portuguese or Italian cooks who arrived in the New England coastal areas and, incorporated their own flavor profile. Massachusetts natives, in their superior condescension, sarcastically labeled this version Manhattan clam chowder, even though it had nothing to do with Manhattan.
So the name was just an insult.
It was simply a term of abuse for any version they deemed impure.
So what's the historical consensus on the word chowder itself? Does the archive offer any clarity?
The origin is still debated, but the sources lean toward two strong contenders. The archaic French coastal word chaudière, meaning a large pot or cauldron, or the Celtic word jouter, referring to a fish peddler. In either case, the original chowder was true fisherman's fare. Salt pork, hardtack crackers, potatoes, and fish. It was rugged.
So milk wasn't originally part of it?
No, milk, the defining ingredient of the New England version, wasn't actually added until the 19th century. That coincided with the rise of the chowder party craze, where the dish became more of a social event.
So if we look at the recipes, what makes the authentic milk-based New England chowder unique?
Well, the standard Rhode Island milk-based recipe captured involves rendering salt pork, sautéing sliced onions, then adding diced potatoes, the hard-shell quahogs, milk, butter, and crackers.
Simple enough.
Compare that with the despised tomato-based versions, like the Long Island clam chowder, which browns the salt pork and onions, but then adds strained tomatoes, water, maize, and quahogs.
And the main chowder recipe has a surprisingly moving detail about poverty, right?
It does. A writer named Mabel G. Hall notes in her manuscript that the essential base is always salt pork, onions, and potatoes. She emphasizes that if the cook finds herself without any clams or fish or corn to add to the pot, the dish is still served. It's just called potato chowder.
Wow.
In Depression-era Maine, that simple name change was a quiet, subtle sign of economic scarcity.
The clam kingdom extended to the majestic but already vanishing clambake. What made the traditional Rhode Island clambake so complex that it became impractical for the 1940s?
It was an incredible orchestration of heat and timing. It required digging a deep hole, heating specialized stones until they crackled when you sprinkled water on them, then layering the stones with wet seaweed, usually rockweed, which holds moisture and imparts a specific flavor, and then placing all the components in layers. Clams, quahogs, fish, lobsters, crabs, sweet potatoes, chicken, even tripe.
So everything at once.
Everything at once. The critical element was high skill, ensuring every single item came out perfectly done at the exact same moment. The source material notes that because of this complexity, most shore dinner fixins were already being cooked much more easily on kitchen ranges in nearby sheds.
And if you were lucky enough to attend one of these traditional bakes, what was the dessert?
Watermelon. It was the simple, cooling palate cleanser necessary after that immense, rich feast of steam and smoke.
Now, if we move inland to Vermont, we find a different, much more solid culinary identity, one that actively rejects any sense of urban sophistication.
Precisely. Vermonters preferred plain, solid, substantial foodstuffs, deliberately eschewing the frothy sauces, elegant salads, and fancy appetizers favored by the metropolitan sophisticated set. They wanted food that had presence and substance.
But they weren't simple cooks, they were masterful with preserving and using spices. The archives detail their recipes for gingerbread, caraway cookies, piccalilli, pickled butternuts, and the amazing sweet pumpkin pickle.
The sweet pumpkin pickle recipe is a true example of New England resourcefulness. It involves cutting ripe pumpkin into precise squares and then boiling it for 2 hours in a mixture of cider vinegar, sugar, and a heavy hand of spices like cinnamon and cloves. This preservation skill was vital for surviving the long winters.
But they are, of course, most famous for their regional ritual, maple sugaring. The FWP went deep into the history here.
As they should. Maple syrup is perhaps the only food product produced exclusively in North America. Long before Europeans arrived, the Algonquin people were already processing the sap. They didn't boil it as we do. Instead, they concentrated the sap by freezing it or by dropping hot stones directly into wooden vessels containing the liquid.
Oh.
The reports even contain this amusing detail that Vermont squirrels developed a cruder process of tapping, biting the trees and waiting for the sap to freeze into icicles overnight, which they would then lick off.
And the sugaring ritual actually carried profound political weight over the years, which connects back to the FWP's mission to define national identity.
It's a key insight. Maple sugar was utilized to actively boycott the British after the deeply unpopular 1764 Sugar Act, making it a patriotic foodstuff.
Right.
Later during the 19th century, abolitionists promoted maple sugar as the ethical, anti-slavery alternative to using Caribbean cane sugar produced by enslaved labor. This choice of sweetener was a political statement.
And the sources also note that today, grade A syrup is sold to tourists, but native Vermonters strongly prefer grade B for its much stronger, more robust flavor.
Sure.
The social climax of this entire tradition is the sugaring off party. It sounds like a rare moment of release for these practical, stoic New Englanders.
It's described as a major social event that takes place on a keen morning in late March or early April, marked by the traditional phrase, "She's gonna run today, boys."
Meaning the sap is flowing.
The sap is flowing freely. The FWP documents this as a rare instance where practical Yankees give something away for nothing. It's pure hospitality.
The description of the sensory experience is fantastic.
The mix of the crisp mountain air, the intense smell of boiling syrup hanging over the pine boughs, and the communal warmth. It whets the appetite to an incredible degree. It's noted that the party breaks down social barriers. People drop their reserve, they relax into jovial spirits, and actually forget old feuds in the sunshine.
Focusing only on the delicious consumption of fresh maple syrup poured directly over snow.
Right. Men talk about crops and milk prices. Women swap gossip and recipes, using the maple sugar to sweeten everything from baked beans and brown bread to fruit cobblers.
And the party eventually ends with the participants' belts loosened, bragging about exactly how much sugar they were able to consume before retiring indoors to wait for the fiddle music to start.
And finally, we can't overlook the weekly ritual that sustained the region: baked beans. This was the Saturday night ritual, linked directly to the Puritan laws that forbade any cooking on Sunday the Sabbath.
That historical necessity is so often forgotten today. They had to bake enough food on Saturday to last through Sunday, and beans were invariably included, often baked overnight in the great brick ovens built into the kitchen fireplaces.
And the debates over preparation are classic regional bickering. The source details the intense debate over sweetening. Some families use pure sugar, some use molasses, and others, like Cousin Walter's wife, combined both.
Everyone had their own secret recipe.
And everyone had a specific preference for the cut of salt pork, which had to have a streak of lean and a streak of fat. Partially submerged into the beans, its rendered fat dripping down to create that characteristic glaze.
Moving south, we transition from New England's thrift and tradition to the Deep South, a culture defined by its grouping in the Confederacy, historically impoverished and segregated, but incredibly tenacious in clinging to its unique food traditions as a mark of identity.
That tenacity, especially regarding corn and grain, is immediately evident. The FWP reports from Eastern Virginia reveal an absolute culinary rule. Cold bread simply does not appear on tables. Instead, 2 kinds of hot bread are served, 3 times a day. And perhaps most controversially, the cook is not permitted to use any flour or sugar in their cornbread.
The sheer variety of cornbread types documented by the FWP is astonishing, and each has a specific preparation method tied to Southern history.
There's the classic corn pone, which is molded free-form using the cook's fingers, resulting in a somewhat irregular shape, and baked until it turns a deep, golden brown.
Okay.
Its close relative, the Dodger, is similar, but is specifically fried on an iron griddle, giving it a crispier crust. Then you have the more primitive ash cake, a nod to earlier, simpler cooking methods.
Which was cooked how?
Directly in an open fireplace, sometimes wrapped in corn husks to save the trouble of dusting off the ashes before serving.
And then there's the elite of Southern bread, spoon bread.
Spoon bread sits at the top of the social scale. It's a custard-like consistency made with scalded cornmeal, and it's so soft and delicate that it is genuinely impossible to eat with a fork. It requires a spoon, hence the name.
It represents the height of Southern hospitality and refined use of cornmeal.
Precisely.
When it came to meat, tradition held fast even when the key ingredient was becoming rare. The FWP documented Brunswick stew, which traditionally used game, specifically the flying squirrel.
Yes, the small animal that glides between trees in the Appalachian forests, quite distinct from the nervous city park rodents we know today.
Right.
The source notes that the flying squirrel was already becoming scarce in the 1940s, underscoring the shift away from wild game hunting toward domestication.
And that scarcity immediately forced modern substitutions, which the traditionalists loathed. We see Sergeant Saunders' Virginia recipe for Brunswick stew, substituting bacon for squirrel and adding cabbage,
Prompting purists to scorn the dish as merely a vegetable soup with meat, rather than a genuine game stew.
The FWP also noted the resilience of foraging traditions, like gathering poke salad in Arkansas. This is the tender shoot of the poke bush, gathered in fence corners in the spring.
Right, and it was used as an herbal remedy by Southern blacks. The reports emphasize that it is only non-poisonous if gathered precisely before the bloom unfurls, highlighting the deep, necessary knowledge required for this type of cooking.
One of the most unique insights into Southern community life, especially among African-American communities documented by the FWP, is the chitterling strut in North Carolina or Mississippi. This is a communal feast for fundraising.
These struts were vibrant social events, held to raise money for essential community needs like paying the church bills or buying a winter coat for a neighbor. The defining, unavoidable, and often controversial feature was the food. Chitlins.
Hog intestines.
Hog intestines. And this is where the America Eats manuscript gets intensely visceral. The preparation process sounds monumental, requiring both labor and sacrifice due to the sheer odor.
It sounds intense.
The distinct and unmistakable odor of frying chitlins demands that they must be boiled outdoors, far away from the house, because of the Wright high stench.
A right high stench.
The rigorous cleaning process is described in almost agonizing detail by a woman named Mehitable. Squeezing the contents out, washing the intestines 6 times, meticulously scraping the internal lining with a dull knife, soaking them in salt water for 2 days, and only then boiling them for 3 hours before they're finally ready for the frying pan.
After all that labored days of work, there is still intense debate over the finished product.
Oh, absolutely. The guests at the Strut, like Jordan and Moonstone, argue intensely over the precise preparation. Jordan insists they must be fried crisp and brown, whereas Moonstone, the purist, claims they should only be gently warmed through to preserve the good flavor.
It just demonstrates the level of personal investment and identity tied to even the most humble dishes.
For sure. We also have the contributions of literary figure Eudora Welty, who compiled recipes from antebellum homes in Mississippi, offering them with a delightful mix of pride and challenge.
She included that wonderful line guaranteeing that Yankees are welcome to make these dishes.
Her gumbo recipe in particular is complex and rich. It incorporates ham, okra, 7 different vegetables, plus shrimp, crabs, and oysters, all thickened with a brown roux and seasoned precisely with Leah and Perrin sauce, bay leaves, and thyme.
This is not simple cooking. This is sophisticated, layered flavor.
Not at all.
The FWP also documented local flora traditions that were on their way out, such as the use of the persimmon.
The history is deep. The fruit's name comes from the Algonquin word puchimin. The manuscripts reveal that Southern blacks used the persimmon seeds to make coffee, a kind of huckleberry coffee substitute, and utilized the fermented fruit to make beer.
But these traditions, the sources note, began diminishing as fewer people were too poor to buy store-bought coffee, another subtle sign of the approaching consumer economy.
Exactly.
But the most vivid window into Southern community life, complete with high moral drama, comes from an Alabama anecdote, the Lonely Dale foot washing fiasco. It really sets up the relationship between food, hospitality, and virtue in this community.
This anecdote focuses on Grandma Susie Higgins, who was famous in the backwoods for her yellow cakes and, critically, her magical ham and biscuit. She hosts this tremendous feast following a revival meeting.
And the scene is set. The men are standing around talking crops and politics, keeping a courteous distance, just straining at the leash for the food.
And the drama begins with a seemingly godly man, Wash Hornbuckle, approaching the sparkling spring where Grandma Higgins is standing, observing him.
His first sin is minor but significant. He calmly rinses the snuff from his mouth into the sparkling spring water, contaminating the clean source.
Right. Grandma Higgins sees this but holds her peace, eventually calling everyone to stand and cram. The feast is so abundant, the ham and biscuit, the yellow cake, that the preacher and 100 others eat until they literally snore, delaying the afternoon preaching for over an hour.
But the real transgression comes later.
Yes. It is only after the meeting, during the traditional foot washing ceremony, that Grandma Higgins reveals the true, grievous culinary sin. Wash Hornbuckle had secretly taken a bowl of her spotless biscuit batter, the same batter used for the glorious ham and biscuit feast, and intentionally put his big feet into it.
No!
One after the other, before tracking dirt over a recently scrubbed kitchen board.
That is an immense betrayal of hospitality and cleanliness. What was the resulting moral outrage?
It was immediate and decisive. When the preacher suggested she show grace, ask forgiveness, and wash Hornbuckle's feet the next day, as was the custom, Grandma Higgins snapped back with the famous line, which made it into the FWP report: "If I ever wash his feet, it will be at the end of a cooling board upon which he is laid out."
Wow.
It shows the absolute seriousness, bordering on theological, with which food preparation, cleanliness, and the sanctity of the kitchen were regarded in this deeply traditional community.
Moving west, beyond the historical South, we encounter the vast plains and Southwest. Here, it's a sheer necessity of the frontier. The ranching life and immense cattle operations shaped a uniquely robust and sometimes grotesque cuisine, often sitting alongside the distinct flavors brought by new immigrant cultures.
On the Texas plains, the chuck wagon was the culinary heart of the ranch. The cook was an undisputed monarch in his 60-foot radius domain, and the lifeblood, the bread of life for the cowboy, was the sourdough biscuit.
But the dish that captures the urgency and ruggedness of the frontier best is the one you certainly won't find packaged today. Son of a bitch stew. The name alone tells you how serious they were.
It was later politely amended to son of a gun stew, but the original recipe was designed for maximum efficiency and minimum waste immediately following a calf slaughter.
Okay, so what went into it?
John Snyder, a nationally famous barbecue artist interviewed by the FWP, detailed the process. Taking the calf's liver, heart, sweetbreads, tongue, brains, and the tenderloin, cutting them into fist-sized chunks, and cooking them quickly in a round-up kettle with water, salt, pepper, and onion. It had to begin immediately after the killing for the best result.
The archive even contains a hilarious non-standard version of this, which demonstrates the sheer scale of ranch cooking.
Yes, the truly over-the-top version required a copper wash boiler, not a pot, the entrails of 2 steers, a peck of peeled potatoes, and a 5-pound sack of cornmeal for thickening.
That's not just a meal, it was a feat of logistical gluttony designed to feed massive crews rapidly.
Exactly. And this theme of monumental scale continues with barbecue in the cattle country, which the FWP defined not as a method of cooking, but as a tradition of hospitality.
That's a crucial distinction. True barbecue in this context was hospitality that cannot be bought but must always be given, focusing on whole animal steers or even buffalo cooked for massive communal feasts.
The Nebraska buffalo barbecue recipe included in the manuscripts is intensely technical. It's almost an engineering manual.
Explain the process. It sounds like an ancient ritual mixed with military precision.
It was incredibly precise. The buffalo meat was first chilled for a week, then boned, and rolled into uniform chunks, no more than 26 pounds each, seasoned only with salt and pepper, and then double-wrapped tightly in muslin and burlap.
And the cooking vessel, it was literally the earth.
A 4-foot-deep pit was dug and filled with hardwood coals, which had to burn down for 7 to 12 hours until the resulting bed of glowing coals was 3 feet deep.
Okay.
Crucially, 1 to 2 inches of dry sand were spread over the coals to seal the juices, and then the wrapped meat bundles were placed on the sand, sealed with sheet iron, and covered with 12 to 16 inches of dirt for insulation.
And how long did it cook?
10 to 20 hours. It resulted in this fall-apart tenderness due to the sealed juices and the low, slow heat.
That scale reached its historical peak with the famous Oklahoma political feast, Governor Jack Walton's 1923 inauguration barbecue. The logistics sound absolutely impossible.
The reports from this event are legendary. It was a 3-day feast for over 250,000 guests, and the logistical feats required sound fictional. They used 10,000-gallon coffee pots, kept boiling by running steam directly from 6 fire engines parked nearby.
That's insane.
They processed 3 carloads of coffee, a trainload of cattle, and carloads of salt and pepper. The guests simply used Mother Earth as their festive board, sitting wherever they could find space to eat.
Moving north, we find the Scandinavian North, where cuisine was dictated by the sheer necessity of surviving long, cold winters and the vital need for preservation.
And the most famous example is the highly controversial lutefisk. This is dried codfish imported from Iceland, and it required a truly monumental 15-day preparation process.
15 days. That is dedication to a single dish. What were the
Wow.
steps?
The process starts with soaking the dried fish in water for a full week, with the water being changed daily. Then the fish is transferred to a lye solution for 4 days to achieve that required gelatinous texture.
Lye.
A lye solution. And finally, it must be rinsed in clean water for 4 more days just to remove the lye. It was a serious commitment for what was strictly a company or Christmas dish.
And the social rules around the resulting meal, the lutefisk supper, were just as strict as the preparation.
The field reports noted that attending a lutefisk supper with a small appetite was considered the grossest kind of faux pas. You were expected to consume large amounts of this acquired taste.
And it was served with lefse, that thin, triangular potato flatbread, and lingonberry sauce.
Right. We also see the Minnesota tradition of booyah, a massive kettle stew that was recipe designed for 60 gallons, utilizing multiple meats, oxtails, veal, hen, and enormous quantities of root vegetables.
Then, far out west, the distinct immigrant communities defined their local flavor. The Idaho Basques, who were often sheep herders, were praised for their cooking ability despite often arriving knowing nothing about actually tending sheep.
And their cuisine in Idaho shifted dramatically from their native Basque roots. While traditional Basque food is heavily seafood-based, their Americanized cuisine assimilated to focus heavily on lamb.
And here we get a fascinating insight into market dynamics.
The FWP documents that after WWII, the U.S. Army froze massive amounts of mutton for GIS, leading a generation of returning soldiers to vow never to eat lamb again, causing the market to plummet everywhere except specialized urban centers like New York City.
The Basque dinners themselves sound like theatrical 4-hour-long celebrations.
They emphasized loud, joyous conversation and featured imported delicacies that contrasted with the frontier lifestyle. Dishes included anguillas onacida, the brood of imported eel, and calamares rellenos, or stuffed squid.
So the dining experience itself was inseparable from the social bonding.
Completely.
Finally, the Pacific Coast offered truly strange regional delicacies, unique to the geography. Let's start with the Oregon wild duck.
The Oregon wild duck preparation method is an incredible display of practical ingenuity, eliminating the need for plucking. Hunters would clean the bird but leave the feathers on.
Okay.
The entire unplucked bird was then covered in wet clay and baked in hot coals and ferns. The clay seals in all the juices and steam, and when you break the clay shell, the feathers are removed completely.
Resulting in a tender, better-flavored bird. That's brilliant.
It is.
And Washington offered what the source material bluntly calls nature's ugliest comestible creature, the geoduck. I love the descriptions in the archive.
The description is indelible. A clam that has seemingly bitten an even larger penis. It has an oval shell and a thick foot-long phallic neck, or siphon.
And the name, pronounced gooey duck, comes from a Nisqually Indian word meaning digging deep, because it can bury itself 4 feet in the sand.
And despite its appearance and the difficulty in selling it locally in places like Seattle's Pike Street Market where people wanted to see it but not buy it, it is North America's largest clam.
And incredibly patient. Geoducks are noted to live for about 150 years.
Yeah, and though it was difficult to sell domestically at the time, the manuscripts confirm it was already popular in Japan, foreshadowing its eventual status as a high-value export.
And the most ridiculous culinary spectacle of the West had to be the annual Washington Smelt Fry on the Cowlitz River.
Thousands of people, 3,000 recorded in the reports, would gather, using improvised fishing gear like bird cages and laundry baskets to catch millions of these small silver fish.
And the climax, designed purely for publicity, was truly absurd.
They had a 10-foot skillet placed over a fire. To grease it, bacon rind was tied to the feet of 2 girls who then skated and danced in the sizzling utensil.
You're kidding!
Not at all. They then dumped hundreds of pounds of fish into the pan, tossed on flour, and the chef turned it all with a garden rake.
Wait, they ate that fish prepared with a garden rake?
No, that was the spectacle. That particular batch was usually just dumped into the river.
Oh, thank
The
goodness.
actual crispy cornmeal rolled smelt was already prepared and served from trays brought over from a nearby hotel. The point was the communal absurdity, not the specific culinary merit of the public display.
The journey from the chuck wagon and the foot washing fiasco to the urban centers of the east and west coasts reveals the future of American food already taking shape. It's a world built on speed, convenience, and emerging, sometimes bizarre trends.
Right. This section is vital because it bridges that chaotic regional past with the industrialized future.
And New York City was ground zero for this shift toward convenience. One of the greatest forerunners of standardized rapid service was the automat.
Founded by Horn and Hardart, a Philadelphia-based company. They have a fascinating concept, essentially an automated cafeteria.
Describe the user experience for the listener.
Well, the food was dispensed from these small glass windows using coin slots, originally just a nickel. You'd drop your coin, open the little door, and retrieve your portion.
It represented the ultimate antisocial culinary experience, designed for maximum efficiency in a rush.
For sure. It became immensely popular, especially after the war, until traditional fast food chains like Burger King and McDonald's eroded its following.
Leading to its eventual closure in 1991, yet the automat was famous for specific quality items, right? Namely, its constantly replenished good coffee and its delicious cinnamon buns.
But NYC also maintained institutions that held on to the deep past. The Grand Central Oyster Bar is one of the few places mentioned in America. Eats still operating today.
And the history of oysters in New York is incredible, dating back millennia.
Absolutely. The FWP documents the ancient history of the harbor oyster beds, with ancient shell piles carbon dated to 6950 BC, underscoring how long this resource has been central to the region.
And of course, there was Delmonico's, the most famous restaurant of the Gilded Age, responsible for 3 dishes that are still known today.
Steak Delmonico, Delmonico potatoes, and the internationally famous lobster Newburg.
And the origin story of lobster Newburg is classic New York drama.
It was originally lobster à la Wenberg, named after a wealthy gourmet patron, skipper Ben Wenberg, who devised the dish using rum, heavy cream, and egg yolks, cooking it in a chafing dish right there in the dining room.
But the name changed because of a scandal.
Indeed, Wenberg caused a scandalous scene in the public rooms. The manuscripts don't specify the exact nature of the scandal, only that it was grievous, leading Charles Delmonico to blackball the skipper and immediately change the dish's name from Wenberg to Newburg to erase any connection.
Shifting to the social side, the FWP also documented the phenomenon of New York literary teas.
Which is ironic because tea itself was a rarity. The conventional beverages were decidedly stronger: dry martinis, Manhattans, and scotch.
And the food was intentionally dull.
Uninteresting canapes with few takers. The point of these gatherings was not gastronomy but networking and gossip. The sources note that heavy conversation is invariably frowned upon.
Meanwhile, on the West Coast, Los Angeles was already obsessed with what was new and hip, embodying the emerging consumer culture. The high rate of transplants, mostly from the Midwest, meant that people who had lived there a dozen years regarded themselves as old-timers.
But despite that rapid modernity, the regional roots clung fast. Los Angeles hosted the annual Iowa Picnic, where up to 150,000 Iowans would gather at parks to swap tall tales and eat huge amounts of traditional food, especially potato salad made strictly from handed-down recipes.
A massive annual attempt to recreate the regional comfort of the vanished past in the hyper-modern West.
But Los Angeles was also the most important center for the emerging health food cult. This is where we see a fundamental shift in the philosophy of eating, moving away from sustenance toward chemical optimization.
This sounds like a direct philosophical challenge to the 15-day lutefisk ritual or the multi-day buffalo barbecue we just discussed. Those traditions required immense labor and time. This movement seeks instantaneous, effortless results.
Exactly. A Dr. J.W. Wigglesworth, tired of telling his patients to eat more vegetables, started pulverizing them, evaporating the water, and encapsulating the residue so patients would consume their nutritional needs as medicine, effectively removing labor and taste from the equation.
And this cult certainly had its quirks. The sources document a truly bizarre proposed cocktail.
It was intended to make the traditional blue ruin drinker look like a sissy. The concoction was a mixture of gasoline and evaporated milk, sarcastically named Milkaline.
You have to be kidding me.
While clearly satirical, it illustrates the extreme lengths to which people were going to marry the old concept of health with new, experimental, and convenient combinations.
In the Southwest, encompassing Arizona and Texas, the enduring impact of Mexican cuisine provided another layer to the modern palate.
Right. And we see the clear definitions of staple dishes that are now commonplace. The taco, defined here as a tortilla folded around shrimp, sausage, and chili stew. The tostadita is a small, toasted tortilla with edges crimped, arranged with lettuce and radishes. The simplest sandwich documented is the burrito, a jelly roll wrapped around beans, or more elaborately, containing avocado and white chicken meat.
And the communal culinary tradition survived here as well, particularly with the Christmas Eve tradition of menudo.
Menudo, prevalent in Arizona and Texas, is a soup made from beef tripe, including intestines, boiled for at least 4 hours with hominy. That hot, brothy soup is deeply ingrained in the community tradition and is believed to be nourishing and strengthening.
Finally, before we wrap up, the FWP archives contain a surprisingly passionate, detailed critique of the modern approach to perhaps the most basic side dish, mashed potatoes. This author clearly takes their starches seriously.
This is a remarkable piece of food criticism. The anonymous author rails against the trend of serving whipped or fluffed potatoes, dismissing them as pasteless, snowy white travesties of consumer convenience.
The critique gets intensely technical and slightly humorous, focusing on the quality of the potatoes themselves.
The author specifically criticizes the diabolical process by which restaurant chefs select watery, badly drained culls, the wrong kind of spuds, and remove them from the heat before they are done, injecting lumps into them.
So what's their rule?
The author insists the dish requires seasonal constraint, arguing that a potato rebels if you try to mash it in late May or early June, turning into a translucent paste.
So when is the only acceptable time for a proper mashed potato?
The dish should only be served in autumn, specifically October or November, about the time hogs are killed and head cheese is being made, because that, according to the writer, is when the spuds are ready to accept their destiny as a magnificent lumpy side dish.
A perfect, tiny snapshot of a culture that respects seasonality and proper preparation above all else.
This colossal, chaotic stack of FWP manuscripts, this unpublished America Eats archive, is an incredible gift, precisely because it is unfiltered and unedited. It documents a food landscape that was radically decentralized, governed by intense regional customs, and fueled by community labor.
We've witnessed the intensity of culinary battles, the chowder wars, the mint julep feuds that defined identity in the South, and the rigid traditionalism of New England. We've seen the resilience of immigrant culture, the 4-hour Basque dinners, and the 15-day lie-based ritual of lutefisk.
And we've documented a food chain that still involved true wild game, from the endangered flying squirrel to the enormous ancient geoduck.
But what stands out most across all these regions is the social contract of food. Eating was never a solitary, convenient act found behind a coin slot. It was a communal event.
Whether for fundraising at a chitterling strut, political maneuvering at a Buffalo barbecue, or social bonding at a Vermont sugaring off party, the labor and the time required bonded the participants.
The editors of the FWP knew this world was ending. They foresaw how the rising consumer economy and industrialized food jello, factory-made bread, bottled salad dressing would flatten these distinct traditions in the name of convenience.
And they were right. The decade following the FWP's demise saw the U.S. GDP nearly triple, government military spending increase sevenfold, and the country shift overwhelmingly from an export-based economy to a high-speed, convenience-driven consumer economy.
The project ended abruptly on the eve of the U.S. entry into WWII. We've seen how the war accelerated consumerism and the military-industrial complex that would shape the second half of the 20th century. The question this archive raises, which is worth mulling over long after the recipes are shelved, is this. What unique aspect of our regional American soul, beyond just the flavor and texture of the food, did that pivotal wartime moment cause us to lose forever? Think about the value we placed on time, labor, and communal gathering. Did we trade our soul for a cinnamon bun from the automat?